Hey, it's Nick from the NixMyth Podcast, and this week we are getting into a lot of stuff. We're talking about how do we live by principle and not by feelings. Now, I know this may step on some toes because we're talking about church leadership, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about self-discipline, and some people are going to get upset, but you'll be all right. Grace of God's going to go before us, and he's going to soften hearts. So please tap in, join the conversation, and let's get to it. Hey, we are your hosts, Nick Smith.
And Kylie Jo Smith, and we are moving on past distraction.
Moving away from distraction.
Don't be distraction. Don't need you anymore.
We're focused now. Everybody's focused. You know what you're doing.
That series is over. And we're moving on into what I think is probably my greatest area of weakness. Which is
barbecuing
training.
Ribs. Oh.
Yeah.
Say it again.
That too. Training. No, and I say weakness, like, it's not that I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I don't know what it is, really. I can't tell you 100%.
Oh, we're gonna get into it, but before we do, Inner Circle, what's up, y'all? How y'all doing?
Hey.
If you want to know more about being a part of our Inner Circle, please go to patreon.com/NixMyth Podcast, and we got something coming for our Inner Circle. I think we're 2 pages away from finishing it. It is our real life no myth coloring book.
Mm-hmm. And the devotional.
And the devotional, yes, we're just waiting on that to be edited. So a devotional is being edited. It's coming your way. Inner Circle is going to get that first. Yes. So if you want to know more about that, check us out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into it because it's bad.
It's bad. It's bad. It's really
it's not
bad.
Really bad. We were talking before we started recording, and I was like, I think I need training. Like, I need it. I need that motivation. I think I thrive on the structure of an end goal and starting with certain principles and disciplines that like get me to that goal, and not just short term, but like maybe it is more short term. I think I like short term goals more than the long term, because the long term I can get distracted.
Come on,
in which case I would go back and watch those episodes from before. But it's like training is essential, but as Christians, we have to do it differently.
Well, and let's just clarify what we're talking about. So like training has a lot of meanings, right? So we can be talking about physical, spiritual, building trains. We can talk all of this stuff, doing a conga line. We can talk about all that. But specifically, how do we as Christians live with this mindset of, like Paul said, pursuing a prize? Like we make our bodies slave to this goal, this end thing. How do we do that even when we don't feel like it? Even in those seasons where we're not feeling the presence of God, or we're not feeling the motivation, or we don't feel all the warm and fuzzies, right? How do we pursue that goal in that moment? How do we live by principle, not by feeling?
Wow.
And that idea, first off, is born out of, as Kylie Jo was just sharing, is born out of our real life. Like, this is something that we struggle with consistently, is having a consistency in walking with purpose in everything that we do. Because it's a lot easier to have purpose when you see the goal, right?
Yeah.
When you see the prize, like your prize is heaven. That's awesome, but it's difficult at times to maintain a lifestyle of principle, maintain a lifestyle that has the intensity needed.
Yeah.
To pursue the things of the Lord when it's just like Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like it's just like
and we thrive so much on routine in our culture, like routine and predictability and like things being the same. Like that's what we think of as the predominant consistency that we need, because it's like, well, you need it. Like even with our jobs, it's like most traditional jobs, you have a start time, you have a period of time you're doing your work, and then you have a clock out time.
And then they have extra work they send you home with.
Or you have overtime that you do on the weekend. That's traditional jobs. Now, not everybody works a traditional job. So I get that there's some nuance there, but we have this, like, we need routine, but it's so much deeper than just things happening at the same time every day that you can count on.
Yeah.
We need like discipline, and we need those principles to guide the routine. Cause like you can set up a schedule, but if you don't have principles for why you're doing this at this time, you're more likely to find other things to fill that routine. Like, oh, well, I mean, I guess I'm just doing it because it says it on the paper.
Yeah.
Maybe I could do something different. I'm at the same time, but I'm still getting something done.
Yeah.
And that's where I personally fall into the like, oh, why do I do that?
Yeah. And having a why, a deeper why is necessary for motivation. But actually, so my father-in-law, shout out Wind Pusher. I have multiple father-in-laws. One of my father-in-laws shared.
You got dads all around
dads
here.
on dads on dads. That didn't sound right. That's not what I meant. I meant multiple fathers. Anyway, one of my father-in-laws, we were having a conversation once, and he was saying that you can stop a man that's motivated, but you can't stop a man that made a decision. And that's something that I think we've lost in the church, because being a Christian is supposed to be countercultural.
Yeah.
And the culture that we live in is stating that your feelings are your truth. And your truth and your feelings should dictate not only how you interact with the world, but how the world should interact with you, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with Generation Z and Generation Alpha, right? It's weird even saying that. But we deal with children in our ministry and youths. And this concept of like, well, I feel this, therefore you have to cater the way that you speak to me, or cater the way that you interact with me. That's something that we're actively teaching the students that we work with. It's like, no, the world doesn't change because of the way you feel. Yet as Christians, we've kind of bought into that.
Yeah.
We've bought into that spiritual walk of like, well, you know what? I don't really feel like reading my word this week. I don't really feel like doing devotions. I don't really feel like going to church. I don't really feel like, so I'm just not going to do it. And I think now is one of the few times, and I don't know, because I've only lived my life, right? I've never lived before my lifetime. But in doing research and looking at the history of the church, going to church because you feel like it or not feel like it has never been a thing.
Yeah. No.
Like going to small groups, not going to small groups because I don't feel like it, not going to Bible study because I don't feel like the desire to do something was never important.
Yeah.
It was the principle behind the matter. It was, have you made the decision to follow Christ? Because if so, this is the path, right? Like if you've decided to go, like we were talking about training, if you've decided to run this marathon, you can't just get up one morning when you have the motivation, be like, I want to run the marathon today. Let's do it. I mean, you can. You'll probably die, though.
You can. It's just not going to work out well for you.
It ain't going to work. You're going to fall. But if you say, okay, I want to run the marathon, and so now I have to pursue that goal. I have to train. The path to the marathon is fraught with, heartache and blisters and calluses and new shoes and throwing
sore
up
muscles
and sore muscles and, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But when you sign up to run that marathon, that's the path you've chosen.
Yeah.
But so often in our Christian walk, we say we've signed up for this Christian thing, right? I want to be a believer in Christ. I want to follow Jesus. I want to, he's radically transformed my heart. And so now I'm devoting my life to him. So I don't really feel like doing most of the stuff that he requires.
Yeah, so I don't like dealing with people, or I don't like church, church stuff, church politics.
I love Jesus. I just don't do church.
And it's hard because not saying that Jesus says, hey, if you want to follow me, you have to be involved in church politics. It's not what we're saying. But in the context of, especially if you are in Western culture, in this context, part of engaging with the body of believers is understanding, well, if I'm going to be in community with people who follow Jesus, there's a way to do it. There is a path to engaging with people and being in proximity with people and connecting with them where they are. And a lot of times we think that's only, down on Skid Row. Like, I'm going to connect with people where they are. But you also might need to connect with people where they are in the pew. Like, you might need to also change what you are putting on that principle. Does that make sense? Like what you are projecting onto the principle. Like, well, in order to engage with people and be in community, what it really means is I should do it this way because that's what I feel. And it's like, no, the principle says like community, godly community. And where you are, the closest godly community is this.
And you know what? That just brought a thought to my mind. Are you connecting with where you are, like personally? Like, are you connecting with where you are? Because so often I think we put that boundary of like, in my own space, in my own home, my own job, I'll kind of do my Jesus thing. But when I'm feeling, then I'll go to church, then I'll go to group, then I'll go to. But we're not actually allowing the Lord to meet us where we are, because we put that boundary of like, well, I'm not feeling it now. When I am feeling it, when I get to this certain level, then I will engage. But God's like, no, we don't do that. Like wherever you are, that's where the Lord's going to meet you. That's where rubber meets the road, as it were.
So are you the rubber?
Or the road?
God's the rubber.
Or the road. He's everything. He's the rubber and the road.
He is both.
You're just lucky to be there.
So just kind of like drawing us back. Like,
yes.
It's easy for us to get drawn into our feelings and to say, well, these things I should be doing as a believer in Christ, I don't feel like doing them.
Yeah.
I'm not motivated to do them.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we get back to the principle? Like what draws us back into, because really and it's hard because like principle versus discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have the discipline because of the principle.
Yes.
You don't, it's not vice versa. You don't just put on I'm going to have this discipline and then have no reason for it, because then eventually it's not going to be discipline anymore. It's just going to be a random thing you do every now and then when you feel like it.
Which is a form of, you are disciplined. You're disciplined in following what you feel. And so the principle guides your discipline, right?
That's
the principle,
interesting, yeah.
You're disciplined to your principle. And if your principle is that my comfort is exalted, my comfort is highest. If your principle is that leisure time is most important, if your principle is that, like that's your principle, you don't really, then your discipline will fall in line with that.
Wow. Okay.
And so your principle has to be on something greater than yourself and greater than temporary feelings that flee, based on whether you ate breakfast or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, yeah, so we'll get to that. But before we do, before we do, somebody that needs to hear this. You need to share with someone that you've just been having a conversation, because I know you just had a conversation with somebody about, man, I really need to get back into reading my word. I've just been so out of discipline. I haven't been able to
go back to the gym,
to be in fellowship. Ain't been at the gym. My eating's been off. Like, you just had this conversation. I know you did. So whoever you were talking to, share this with them. Be like, weren't we just talking about this? Check it out, because that's how the Holy Spirit moves. But anyway.
Yes. So, this like idea of our principles and discipline and our feelings, like how we understand these things, it's really hard to do the honest work of evaluating where you are on your own.
Yes.
Because
oh my goodness, yes,
we can always make exceptions for ourselves. Like I just did it today. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I shouldn't have anymore, but you know what, I should, because I kind of did a good job yesterday. And like instantly on my own, I justified something that if I was going based on my principles and having self-discipline and self-control, I would not have done. And so we need that community. We need accountability. And we've talked about all of these things at different points in the podcast. But I think when you were bringing up principles, honestly, it made me think of like military training.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it, people in combat, and if you've ever been in combat, maybe you can speak to this. Maybe this resonates with you. When you are, in the thick of it, and you have to get up and you have to grab your weapon and be ready on the front lines, the thought of, I don't really want to do this today, it's not enough to stop you. Because why? Because you started your training in such a disciplined and rigorous way.
Yeah. And
you were taught, this is what you do in this environment. This is how you do it. And it was practiced so much to the point that, you were sweating so much, and it was just like.
Those of you who aren't watching, she just made a face. That's all it was.
But you got to a point where it was second nature. You got to a point you were broke. And now the military does it in a very specific way.
Yeah.
The American military, where you are broken down mentally, physically, emotionally, to where you're not thinking about yourself anymore, because you're doing this out of sacrifice for your country, right? And for your family and the people around you. And for your unit. And so when you get into that place, when you have the emotion of, I don't really want to be in this war, I don't really want to fight today, that is overridden by your innate sense of principle and duty and service and honor. And so as Christians, like there's a lot of things in the scriptures that compare like the walk of faith with like almost a military like position.
Well, they used to call, think of the old hymns, like Onward Christian Soldier.
Right.
Like, I'm in the Lord's army. Like there is definitely there are principles that align with that type of training and that type of devotion to a cause greater than yourself. And so, honestly, the thought of, I don't feel like fighting this war today. Those folks who are, we have a lot of people in our family and in our circle group, our friend circle. What am I saying? Circle group, friend circle, inner circle, friend group.
We get together and talk about circles.
People that we know that have been in combat. And that's never a thought of like, you know what? 5 a.m. came a little too early. I'm going to go ahead and hit that snooze button.
I mean,
not going to meet for formation.
Yes, but at the same time, like, I'm sure the feeling comes along, but those people that we know, that was never what won the day. It wasn't like, I didn't feel like doing it, so I just didn't do it. Really? How did that work out for you in active combat?
Come on now.
It didn't happen because even though the feeling was there,
yeah,
they had to almost dissociate from the feeling for a moment in order to do the greater thing. And as Christians, we are not gifted. We are not disciplined or trained in this in our Western culture. It is not. We are so accustomed to obeying the comfort, obeying the, well, wait a minute. That doesn't sound safe for my feelings.
Or that doesn't sound fun. Like, listen,
or entertaining.
I don't mean to step on toes, but tuck your feet in.
Tuck
your feet in if it's a problem. Our church leaders have trained us in that way. Like, if you go to a lot of church leadership institutes, if you go to a lot of church growing, church seminars where they're teaching you how to reach lost people, a lot of times they're not teaching you how to reach lost people. They're teaching you great marketing, and they're teaching you how to engage in a comfort-based society by providing a product that people will consume. And honestly, there's a lot of times I remember being at that place where I'm like, I want to just tell people to just like hush and do your job. Like, your job as a believer is to pray for people. I don't care if you don't like them. Do your job. Like, your job is to love people. That's what Christ calls us to. And if you don't want to do that, boo-hoo. That's fine. You shouldn't want to pray for your enemy, but that's the sacrifice. That's what we're called to as believers. And that thought of they just didn't have anything fun. There was nothing entertaining. I just wasn't getting anything out of it. But what were you putting into it?
Come on.
How much devotion were you giving? And I'm speaking to myself. So if your toes hurt, mine hurt just as bad. There are so many times where I find myself in the middle of a book even. I'll be halfway through the book. I'm like, I don't really feel like finishing that. Like, but where's your sense of commitment, Mr. Smith? Where's your sense of follow through? You started it, finish it. But we don't have, that isn't cultivated in the church. It's not something that's been gifted to us. And I love that in the ancient Hebrew, like, or even the Hebrew language now, like, the idea of righteousness is equated. It's a very tangible language. Like, when you read the ancient texts, like, that idea of righteousness is equated with walking rightly. It's equated not with how you feel. The righteous aren't those that had good thoughts about what they did. The righteous are those that did good. Right? There is not, well, I know I didn't actually stop and help them, but I sent out my thoughts and prayers. And so, no, you're not righteous because of what you thought. You're righteous because of what you did based on the faith that God gave you, right?
Yeah.
It's the faith that makes you righteous, but that's demonstrated in your works. And we see that in the New Testament. We see it in James. We see in Paul's writing, we see all of this equates to, like, it's not about how you feel, it's about what you do. And I think at the end of the day, as a believer, we have to come to that point where we have to enter into community humbly and be allowed to be disillusioned or let go of our disillusionment so that we can enter into reality and be like, you know what? I ain't been doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's okay. There's grace for that.
Yeah. And like with the feelings piece, like, again, going back to, we've talked about this before. What does your feelings say about you? I don't feel like doing this. Good. Okay. Well, why? Why don't you feel like serving other people? What does that say? Like, what is the greater thing that needs to be, what's the greater mountain that you need to say, get out? Like, what is the bigger thing? And so I think we can definitely have a time of like, I'm putting my feelings to the side, not in a sense of stuffing them down and ignoring them, but how I feel in this moment about this person has nothing to do with whether or not Jesus has called me to love them. How I feel about this person's choices, the way they dress, how their breath smells.
Come on now.
What color hair they got has nothing to do with the Imago Dei.
Come on.
And so I'm going to put it aside. Set yourself aside long enough, right? Look it up. It's in the Bible. Set yourself aside, that feelings part of yourself. And then later go back, okay, why did I have that reaction to that person? And also, I think one of the things with going back with the walking rightly, when you first learn to take steps, when a human being first learns to take steps, we fall. Like, there's a natural progression of like,
we fall down,
right? But we get up. And I think when we are practicing these principles, when we're putting these things into motion, there's going to be a natural period of time where we are falling. And we are, because it's something we're learning to do again, we're figuring it out. But you don't start out trying to run. And I think with Christians, a lot of times especially this American sense of like accomplishment and showing it off on social media. Well, if I can get to the tippity top, if I can be running this race, you have to start one foot in front of the other. You have to start daily practicing the thing that you say you're about.
Come on.
And pick the one thing. Like, I think for me, I have a list of things that I want to grow in. I can't take the list and say, I'm going to start doing all these things today.
Come on.
I have to say, okay, well, the one thing I really want to work on, I need to shut my mouth. And so I now have to practice that. I have to say every day, okay, the times I'm tempted to speak up and say things a certain way. And in the process, my feelings change. Yeah. It's crazy how like we think our feelings are fixed. Like, I feel this is the way I feel about it, and that's it.
It's not.
No. The more you start to do the right thing, actions first, your feelings will follow the right action. The righteousness will change the mental state that you have.
So good.
And vice versa. If you start thinking rightly about something, oh, this is good, and God says this is good, and I believe what God said, and God is truthful, and so why wouldn't his word be true in my life? Then that will start to change the way you act.
Yeah, that's good. I kind of have two thoughts, and then I'll shut my mouth.
I threw all that in there.
No, that was good. Just in response, though, two things that kind of stirred. One was the practice, right? The taking the steps. So there was a book by this monk called Brother Lawrence, and he
like Brother Lawrence, or like
however you want to say it, my brother Larry L Dog.
Larry
That's my
bro,
my bro L. But no, Brother Larry, he wrote Brother Lawrence, he wrote a book called Practicing the Presence of God. And it's a book about spiritual discipline. It's about literally how do you take this concept of being in the presence of God and how do you put it into practice in your daily life. Now, it's really old and ancient, but if you like reading stuff, read that. It's really good. But that thought of practicing has this connection to transformation. Like, the more you practice, the more you change. And just exactly what you were saying. C.S. Lewis has a quote in Mere Christianity, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but I'm paraphrasing. He says, every time you make a decision, you're turning that central part of you either into something more heavenly or something more hellish. And so every time you make a decision to shun the bad and accept the good, to accept the grace of God and to reject selfishness, that central part of who you are, that central character that God is crafting in you, you're participating with the Holy Spirit, and that's shifting away from selfishness and self-gain and self-centeredness, and it's shifting towards the things of the Lord. And so it may not seem today like you can become this believer in your heart that you want to be, the people that you idolize that have been like, missionaries and planning churches or whatever, right? Maybe it's just grandma who prayed deeply every day. You're like, I can never be like that. Well, they didn't start that way. They started by making decisions daily, little decisions that helped shift their fulcrum, right? Helped shift the balance away from themselves and toward the things of the Lord. And so just to empower you, you have that ability.
Yeah.
You have the ability to say no to self, to pick up your cross, and to die daily. And so I guess just my last kind of thoughts is just accept whatever state you're in now. Just know that's not where you're going to be, but don't stay there. Like, the Lord doesn't want you to stay there. He's going to help you. So just whatever that next decision is, allow yourself to shift a little closer to discipline, a little closer to that person that you say you want to be.
I think that's good. I love that as a wrap up. And honestly, starting with identifying for yourself what that end goal is. Of course, yes, as a believer, I want to be more like Jesus. I want to be so purified in my heart and my mind that what I think about and what I do and what I say is aligned with Jesus. Yes, that's the end goal. But even for you, what other goals get you closer to that? Write those down. And one of the things that we were talking about too was before we started recording was like feast and fasting. Like, there are those seasons where you have an abundance of like whatever it is, people to pour into you, or
motivation.
You have that abundance. And then there's seasons where you don't. And we have to cultivate that character that keeps us the same throughout, having that integrity, so that whether what is it? Paul said it, whether I have much or little, whatever it is, that you still find that contentment in God. And so when you are making that list, I will encourage you, and I guess maybe, not warn you, but you know what I'm saying. Don't make the list subjective to what you're going through now. And don't make it thinking that it's going to be the same in the future.
Yeah.
Make that list just as objectively as you can, with other people holding you accountable, so that you're looking at this list with the right character behind it, not just that momentary motivation to be or do something different. I hope that makes sense, because
it does. And if it don't, comment, we'll answer questions.
Yes.
So
this has been the NixMyth Podcast. We hope this episode has connected you
to living truth. Be blessed.